here is in effect controlled by Russian authorities. And just to place it, this here is where U.S. officials say that Russian-supplied missiles shot down the Malaysian airliner MH17.
We begin with growing Russian military activities across the globe. Russia now says it plans to launch long-range bombers on regular patrols from the Arctic onto the Caribbean and Gulf of Mexico. Moscow is also sending a convoy of warships towards Australia. The European leadership has detailed more than 40 major breaches by Russia in the past 8 months. Now, Russian President Vladimir Putin may have some explaining to do as he goes into the G20 summit in Australia. Needless to say, his interaction with other world leaders will be closely watched, as it was at this week's APEC gathering in Beijing. CCTV's Tom Barton reports.
President Barack Obama and Vladimir Putin's public interactions display little warmth these days. Their awkward contact at APEC will be quickly followed up thanks to the G20. The build-up to the meeting has been stormy, with rumours and suggestions that Russia either shouldn't be allowed to go or might not turn up.
I say with sadness that there's no purpose in being there.
Australian Prime Minister Tony Abbott, whose country is hosting the G20 meeting, has pulled back from his talk of shirt-fronting or knocking Putin to the ground, but has said he will have a robust conversation about what he calls the murder of 38 Australian citizens on board flight MH17, which Western governments accuse pro-Russia militants of shooting down in July.
From Prime Minister Abbott to President Obama and others, diplomats and journalists will be watching intently for more signs of the chill that has come between Russia and the West.
In March, Russia was thrown out of the G8 group of nations for annexing Crimea. But in Moscow, the position of Western powers is seen as counterproductive.
I think that if the G8 or the G20 wants to work fully and have influence and have a wide ability to cover problems and solve problems, they need to have dealings with Russia. If these groups turn towards pressure, we're not interested in taking part.
President Obama insists Russia has been supporting militants in eastern Ukraine and says it must stop. But President Putin shows little sign of wanting to acquiesce to the West or show weakness in the face of sanctions. Tom Barton, CCTV, Moscow.
Wolf, this is about Russia's risky, calculated pattern of aggression toward the U.S. and its Western allies. There have been multiple incursions close to U.S. airspace this year. Recently, a Russian military plane came within 50 miles of the California coast. Some of these encounters have come within a razor's edge of causing serious casualties. A dangerous maneuver. A Russian jet fighter buzzes right in front of a U.S. Air Force surveillance plane, within about 100 feet of the nose, a move which U.S. officials said endangered the American crew. Another incident, a Russian military aircraft comes within 50 miles of the California coast, the closest in years. Get ready for more. Russia's defense minister says his military is about to send long-range bombers to patrol near American coastlines.
You're going to have bombers coming in this direction from Russia. You're certainly going to have longer-range bombers coming down this coast, almost certainly. And you're also going to have bombers coming down this coast, and he also mentioned in particular flying in the Gulf of Mexico. So we're talking about ringing the United States with the exception of the Canadian border.
The Russian planes likely won't fly inside U.S. airspace within 14 miles of the coasts, but U.S. officials call the action provocative and destabilizing. Russia's defense minister says it's a response to aggression near its border with Ukraine.
This is a rationalization by Russia, and in particular by President Putin, to strengthen his appeal with his nationalist base.
Russia's aggression playing out around the globe. A Scandinavian passenger jet nearly colliding with a Russian surveillance plane. One incident right out of a Tom Clancy novel. In waters near Stockholm, a mysterious underwater vessel makes an emergency call in Russian. It triggers the largest submarine hunt off Sweden since the Cold War. All these incidents have taken place since Russia invaded Crimea in February. More than 40 close military encounters in that period, according to one European report. Analysts say this is one man, Vladimir Putin, flexing his muscle, desperate to restore Russia's Cold War power.
Putin is personifying as the tough guy, the image of Russia that he wants to present and those around him want to present now, of a Russia that will not back down, of a Russia that will take on the West, and in fact of a Russia that will take on anybody.
Take a look at these black dots that we're showing here. This report says 40 encounters between the Russians and other nations over the past 8 months have rattled nerves and raised tensions to a Cold War level. You mentioned that close call that Jim mentioned as well between a passenger jet and a Russian jet along in here. But there are many others from the Russians. This report says they staged a simulated bombing attack on a Danish island. A Russian jet made threatening maneuvers toward a U.S. reconnaissance plane, including showing that it was fully armed with missiles. Russian planes have buzzed ships, and they even, out in this area, practiced a cruise missile strike within range of New York, Washington, and Chicago. Jake?
And Tom, how close have any of these incidents been to the United States or American troops?
Well, if you look up here on the northern part, you're near Alaska and Canada. In September, 6 Russian jets were spotted up in this area. Russia is suggesting it will have full radar surveillance of this area by year's end. That is not really that uncommon up there. But in June, 4 Russian planes were coming down along the coast here within 200 miles. 2 of them went all the way down here to within 50 miles of the coast of California. That's the closest they've been since the Cold War. They were intercepted by U.S. F-15s. That's just short of U.S. airspace. And such incursions are not unheard of, but they're becoming more common. And this was the closest one in about 2 years, Jake.
Well, what kind of planes are we talking about? What kind of planes do the Russians even have in their arsenal for these types of flights?
For some missions, Russia is using fighter jets along with refueling planes, as Jim just mentioned. But the big piece of equipment on the scene is this. It's the Tupolev 95, nicknamed the Bear by NATO. This plane grew out of the Cold War in the 1950s, way back then. It is a turboprop, so it looks antique compared to modern bombers like the Stealth, but it's a serious weapon. Just take a look at some of the things that it has going for it here. If you go into this plane, you have a maximum speed of almost 600 miles an hour. It has a range for missions of well over 5,000 miles. It can carry 11 tons of ordnance, including cruise missiles and nukes. And like U.S. long-range bombers, it is designed for big impact precision strikes.
Of course, more Russian planes and ships could increase the chances of a potential run-in with our own military. What if there's a mistake? This week, a European watchdog group reported a dramatic rise of encounters between Russian forces and NATO forces. It reported dozens of incidents, 3 of which it claims carried a high probability of triggering a direct confrontation. One of them a reported near crash between a Russian spy plane and a passenger jet. So none of this is routine stuff, and Vladimir Putin is in uncharted territory. Jennifer Griffin's on Fox Top Story at the Pentagon this afternoon. It's one thing to flex your muscle, Jennifer. It's another to put, well, the whole world in jeopardy.
That's right, Shep. And there was also that recent hunt for the suspected Russian submarine off the coast of Sweden that got the U.S. military's attention. 40 incidents involving the Russian military coming into near confrontation with NATO members since Putin's invasion of Crimea. The Pentagon reacted to the announcement from Russia's defense minister today that Russia now plans to extend its long-range Bear bomber flights to the Caribbean. Spokesman Colonel Steve Warren downplayed the threat and simply said the Russians have patrolled in the Gulf of Mexico in the past, and we've seen the Russian Navy operate in the Gulf of Mexico. These are international waters. One obstacle for Russia is refueling. That's why Russia's military is in talks with Cuba and Venezuela for air basing rights. Pentagon officials don't see the move as a serious threat, but it is a reminder that Putin is trying to make his military more visible and more assertive. In fact, last September, Russian Bear bombers, those strategic bombers that can carry nuclear weapons, reportedly practiced cruise missile strikes against the U.S. Shep.
Jennifer Griffin at the Pentagon. Jen, thanks so much. Let's dig deeper on this. Foreign Affairs columnist and author Gordon Chang is with us on the news deck. What's he doing?
I think what he's trying to do is he's saying to the rest of the world, look, I can do whatever I want. The United States can't stop me. I've got a new friendship with the Chinese. They're going to finance what I'm doing. So I'm going to grab what I want. And that's clearly Georgia, Ukraine, Eastern Ukraine. You know, it's awful.
But why does he's doing it because of his own economic situation?
Well, I think so, because last year the Russian economy grew 1.3%, which was below every estimate. This year it's going to 0.5% growth, and that was before the recent plunge in oil prices, which is bringing oil prices to a 3-year low. And Russia depends on selling hydrocarbons to Western Europe and now to the Chinese.
So what advantage does it give him to take over other countries and fly his bombers in the Gulf of Mexico?
Well, Putin has always said that he was going to reassemble parts of the Soviet Union that he felt were taken from Russia unfairly at the end of the Cold War. So clearly right now he is going to do that while the United States is certainly distracted in a number of other areas, and the Chinese are going to finance him because they have just signed up a major oil and gas deal. And this is going to be important for Putin because now he's going to have the money to fly those bombers in the Gulf of Mexico.
This probably sounds very deja vu-ish to some of our viewers because under Reagan it was so similar.
It was similar, and what Reagan did towards the end of the Cold War was to drive down the prices of commodities that Soviet Union sold. And that's what brought the Soviet Union to the end, because they no longer had the money to support their military and to keep their people happy. What we're seeing right now is the same dynamic because the prices for Russian commodities are coming down, but we're not intentionally doing it. If we were actually to start to push commodities down with the Saudis, this would bring Putin to the edge.
But he still has the Chinese. Would that not be an affront to the Chinese if we were to do such a thing?
Well, it certainly would, because they both see themselves as on the same page. They see the United States as the common adversary, and that's why they're molding their militaries together. That's why the Russians are now selling frontline equipment to the Chinese, and that's why they're now cooperating in East Asia as well in other places.
What's going to happen, though, if there's a mistake? If there's an accident between one of these throwback bombers of the Russians and something we're flying around?
Well, we saw this during the Cold War when there were a number of near misses, and we were very fortunate to get through that.
We got lucky.
We got lucky. But the problem right now is that Putin thinks that he can use nuclear weapons not as instruments of deterrence, but as really weapons of aggression. Because at the end of August, he talked about using nukes to hold on to what he had grabbed in Ukraine. And so he learned a lesson. He got away with it, so he's going to try it again. And now the Chinese have seen, Putin can do it. Why can't we do it as well? And because we've heard Chinese threats to use nukes before, now they're going to become emboldened.
Gordon Chang, it's nice to talk to you. Thank you.
Thank you.